Many see progress and environmental protection as competing priorities, where one must always be chosen over the other. At ELOS, we see things differently. We see a partnership, a balance between improving the quality of our lives and preserving the places we call home. Our services make it possible for projects to move forward while also ensuring that they comply with all laws and regulations, that sensitive wetlands are not damaged or destroyed, that endangered species and habitats are protected, and that invaluable cultural resources are preserved for future generations. This is where we live, where we play, where we raise our families. We strive for a brighter future, but remain committed to the lands we love. ELOS, where natural environments and human interests intersect.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be taking a look at the value of geographic information systems during hurricane season. And as you can certainly tell from the temperatures outside, we have entered hurricane season. Couple of small housekeeping items before we begin the presentation. First thing is that we are recording the presentation, and it will be available for replay on our YouTube channel. Probably, with the holiday, hopefully tomorrow, maybe the beginning of next week, but you will receive an email when it is available. Please feel free to share it with any colleagues you might think would be interested, or you could just rewatch it yourself if there was something you missed or you want to see it again. We will be taking questions, but not until the end of the presentation. We will be taking questions through the chat function. You can enter a question into the chat at any time during the presentation, but please keep in mind we won't be addressing the questions until the end of the presentation. So once again, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. And now I will turn you over to our presenter today, Mr. J.J. Pearsall.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, In the Eye of the Storm, the Value of GIS During Hurricane Season. We're thrilled to have you with us. My name is J.J. Pearsall, and I'll be your presenter today on behalf of ELOS, an Aventia company. Before we dive into the heart of the presentation, here's a quick look at who we are. Coming up on 20 years, founded in 2006, ELOS Environmental is a professional consulting firm that provides a wide range of client-focused services. We're part of Aventia, along with BEM Systems, St. Germain, Habitat Management, and KC Harvey Environmental. At ELOS, we built a strong reputation across Louisiana by really understanding how to navigate government processes and apply the right technical expertise. That means less red tape for our clients and more efficient, practical solutions that keep projects moving and budgets in check. Again, I'm J.J. Pearsall, GIS manager here at ELOS. I've worked in the GIS field for over 20 years, most of that time spent in upstate New York at the county level, and a little over a year here in Louisiana at ELOS. I'm excited to share how GIS can provide clarity and coordination when every second counts. Today, we're going to look at how GIS can be applied across three critical phases of a hurricane: before the storm, how we prepare and model risk; during the storm, how we monitor and respond in real time; and after the storm, how we support recovery, analysis, and resilience planning. Let's jump in, starting with how GIS supports preparedness before the hurricane ever makes landfall. Proactive preparedness means taking steps before a disaster happens to reduce risk, protect assets, and improve response. Instead of reacting after damage occurs, it's about planning ahead, like identifying hazards, securing infrastructure, and developing clear communication strategies to minimize impacts and recover faster. GIS plays a key role in gathering all layers needed pre-storm, floodplains, storm surge areas, historical storm inundations, layers like hospitals, power grids, evacuation routes, communication towers, water treatment plants, levees are all very, very important. GIS plays a critical role in staging resources ahead of a hurricane. By mapping and analyzing key elements such as critical infrastructure, high-risk zones, population centers, and supply locations, GIS allows emergency managers to strategically position resources like generators, fuel, and emergency vehicles where they'll be most effective. This spatial insight helps identify gaps in coverage, streamline logistics, and ensure that life-saving assets are pre-positioned for rapid deployment when disaster strikes. GIS identifies optimal staging areas by layering and analyzing diverse data sets, including elevation, flood zones, road networks, proximity to essential services, and population density. This comprehensive approach enables planners to select safe, accessible locations that maximize coverage and minimize response times. With GIS, staging becomes not only more strategic and efficient, but also more resilient, helping emergency teams reach those in need faster and more effectively. Leveraging data for informed decisions. GIS platforms can integrate data from local, parish, state, and federal entities. Some examples of data from local entities would be schools, shelters, hospitals, address points, tax parcel data, and fire stations. Some of the data pulled at the state level could be hurricane evacuation routes, DOT data, power, gas, telecommunications, and floodplain maps. At the federal level, we have FEMA firm maps. NOAA has historical storm tracks, storm surge modeling, sea level rise predictions. With USGS, they have stream gauge and hydrology data. Also holds the National Hydrology Data Set, NHD. And also we have the census to pull all our demographics that can help us focus on the most at risk. FEMA, now let's move towards during the storm. The FEMA incident period. The FEMA incident period refers to the official time frame during which a disaster-causing event occurs and causes damage. The period is defined by FEMA and is used to determine eligibility for disaster assistance. Some key characteristics of this would be the start date, the date when the incident began causing damage, end date, the date when the incident is considered to have stopped causing damage. And it's determined by FEMA after assessing the event and consulting with state and local officials. Why is this important? The incident period sets the foundation for many aspects of FEMA assistance. Only damages or losses that occurred within the incident period may be eligible for things as individual assistance, public assistance, or even hazard mitigation grant programs. Also, insurance coordination. Insurance policies may also use the incident period to determine if coverage applies. And there's documentation and claims. Applicants must prove their losses occurred during the FEMA-defined incident period. For example, if a hurricane started on September 1st and ended September 10th, only damage during that time is eligible. Now, during the storm, GIS has the capability to have rapid data collection. This can be real-time monitoring and have situational awareness. GIS integrates live feeds to track hurricane location and intensity, storm surge, wind speeds, and rainfall, also flooding and inundation areas. For an example of that, an EOC or Emergency Operations Center could use GIS dashboards with NOAA, the NWS, and satellite data to monitor the storm's path minute by minute. Also, in evacuation and emergency routing, GIS maps can map those evacuation routes and alternate paths. Also, traffic conditions and road closures, and even blocked or damaged infrastructure. This helps responders and the public move safely and efficiently, especially when conditions change rapidly. For resource development and emergency response coordination, GIS identifies shelter locations and their status in real time, hospitals and emergency facilities, and also identifies high-risk populations, whether that be the elderly, disabled. Disaster recovery, we're moving to after the storm. Permitting is obviously a big part, and GIS documentation supports the rapid issuance of these emergency permits and authorizations for debris removal. Debris mapping and damage assessments. GIS can track these debris locations, size and types, helping to inform local authorities and contractors. And access to debris can be identified for the removal process. These can be done using a Survey 123 app and getting field crews out there to track the debris, which is very important for FEMA and for the data collection that is required to get reimbursed for that, for FEMA money. Debris removal. The process of debris removal can be tracked and mapped using real-time data. We can use apps like Field Maps, which can track people's movements as well as tracking all of the removal process. GIS plays a vital role in grant management and compliance after a hurricane by helping governments, nonprofits, and agencies track funding, prove eligibility, document compliance, and ensure transparency throughout the recovery process. GIS can help where and who needs funding based on damage and vulnerability. How do we do this? By overlaying damage assessments, demographic data, and infrastructure loss. Also identifying socially vulnerable communities like low income, elderly, or the disabled. Also mapping FEMA designated disaster zones and priority funding areas. So why does this matter? This helps justify applications for federal and state grants with clear data-backed evidence. Most federal grants require geographic eligibility, proof of damage or need, environmental compliance. GIS enables spatial documentation of project areas, schools, infrastructure. We also use buffer analysis for floodplains, wetlands, or protected areas. And of course, mapping before and after project impacts. Why does this matter? GIS ensures funding projects meet the grant's rules and help avoid disallowed costs and edits. Let's move into pollutant mapping. GIS helps map potential sources of contamination, such as damaged industrial sites, sewage treatment failures, landfills or hazardous waste storage, agricultural runoff zones, underground storage tanks that may leak fuel or chemicals. Of course, the mapping of this certainly helps emergency teams prioritize testing and contaminant in high-risk areas. The mapping of the, mapping the flood spread and contaminant flow. GIS uses flood extent data from remote sensing, LiDAR, or FEMA flood models, and use watershed and flow direction models, as well as soil and groundwater data to simulate how floodwaters may have transported sewage, oil, or chemicals, how it could have infiltrated into drinking water sources or spread pollutants across urban or agricultural land. Now, tracking environmental sampling and lab results. Environmental teams can collect samples of water that could be surface, groundwater, or drinking, samples of soil and sediment, or even air quality samples. With GIS, this enables GPS tagged sample points, real-time updates from field crews using apps like ArcGIS Field Maps, maps that visualize pollutant levels, maybe E. coli or arsenic, over time and space. Why does this matter? It allows environmental agencies and public health officials to quickly identify where contamination exceeds safe levels. Also, GIS supports cleanup and remediation efforts by prioritizing decontamination zones, planning removal of hazardous materials, the monitoring progress of cleanup contractors, or coordinating with FEMA and EPA on environmental compliance. Communicating the risk to the public. GIS creates public-facing risk maps and dashboards, like I mentioned earlier. Visual alerts showing no entry zones, boil water advisories, or unsafe wells. GIS also creates integration with social media or mobile apps for real-time updates. This can certainly help communities avoid contact with contaminated floodwaters, soil, or food sources, and supports informed decision-making. Long-term recovery, erosion, and sedimentation. After a hurricane, GIS is critical for assessing erosion, sedimentation, and wetland impacts, helping guide both emergency response and long-term environmental recovery. These natural systems are often damaged or reshaped by storm surge, high winds, and floodwaters, and GIS helps quantify and visualize these changes quickly and accurately. Hurricanes can cause severe shoreline retreat, dune loss, and scouring of riverbanks. GIS helps by comparing pre and post-storm imagery satellite, drone, or LiDAR to detect beach erosion, riverbank collapse, or cliff or bluff failure, and then can calculate area and volume of land loss. Sedimentation mapping. Heavy rain and storm surge deposit large volumes of sediment, which can block roads and waterways, bury wetlands and farmlands, and disrupt aquatic habitats. GIS can help in this by using remote sensing to detect turbidity and sediment plumes in rivers, lakes, and coastlines. It can analyze DEMs to track where sediment was deposited. And GIS supports watershed modeling to predict future sediment load patterns. Wetland impact and loss assessment. Wetlands are vital buffers during storms, but hurricanes often erode marsh edges, smoother vegetation with debris or salt water, allow water flow patterns, making wetlands non-functional. So how can GIS help? It can help by comparing pre and post event land cover to detect vegetation stress or die-off, marsh fragmentation or loss, or salinity intrusion. You can overlay with the National Wetlands Inventory or state local wetland data sets. For an example, after Hurricane Katrina, GIS showed that over 100 square miles of Louisiana wetlands were lost due to erosion and saltwater intrusion. Wetlands are protected under laws like the Clean Water Act and NEPA, so documentation damage is key for permitting new infrastructure, justifying wetland restoration grants, and complying with Section 404 and 401 regulations. When we look at long-term monitoring and restoration planning, GIS helps track recovery and restoration over months or years, monitors vegetation regrowth, tracks shoreline or wetland boundary changes using historical aerial imagery, and also guide nature-based solutions, such as living shorelines or even replanting mangroves. Let's talk about damage and risk assessment. This is land use planning after the hurricane. GIS integrates pre and post-storm land use maps, floodplain and hazard maps, such as storm surge and flood zones, and can also integrate damage assessments on buildings, roads, or utilities. I want to talk a little bit about scenario modeling and zoning updates. GIS also supports simulating impacts of different land use policies, visualizing future flood risks under climate change, and also updating zoning maps to restrict development in new hazard zones. This can help decision makers balance growth with safety and sustainability. Community engagement and transparency is a big deal. GIS-based story maps and interactive apps help show residents how proposed land use changes affect neighborhoods, collect community input on rebuilding priorities, and it can increase public awareness of risk and plans. Lastly, GIS is not a mapping tool, is not just a mapping tool. It's a lifeline before, during and after hurricanes. By leveraging GIS, emergency managers, planners, and communities can better prepare, respond, and rebuild stronger. Thank you for joining today's webinar.
Thank you, JJ. We'll go ahead and open up the webinar for questions now. If you have a question, please feel free to enter it into the chat box. Just feel free to enter your question, whatever question it might be. I'd actually like to start with a question because my expertise is not in GIS, it's in marketing. I noticed, JJ, on one of the slides, it mentioned something about streetlights and signs and having an inventory of that. How does that play into hurricane season or GIS?
Yes, great question. One I accidentally skipped over in talking about it, but certainly documenting streetlights and street signs before a hurricane is critical for FEMA reimbursement. FEMA requires a pretty detailed kind of a pre-event inventory to verify the damage and to justify replacement costs. So having an accurate, GIS-based records help certainly streamline the post-storm assessments. It certainly speeds up damage reporting. And, when a local community does that, it certainly maximizes the potential for federal recovery funding. And here at ELOS, we just finished up a street sign survey in St. John the Baptist Parish, collecting all their street sign data on parish maintained roads. Some of that data included, of course, GPS location. We took a photo of every sign, the condition of each sign, and even what type of pole that it was on. So very important to get that done before a hurricane. And also streetlights. So if we inventory streetlights by GIS, we can have a GPS point at every light, whether it's working or not, and have all that GIS data ready to go. And in case if a disaster hits, FEMA now has documentation of what was actually working before pre-storm, and then judge after the storm. So having that GIS data before these events is extremely important to get the funding reimbursed.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Again, please feel free to just type your question into the chat box, and in the chat box, I have put JJ's email address. Should you think of a question later, or should something come up that you need clarification or would like to get a deeper explanation of, please feel free to reach out, and he'll get back to you with an answer. I'm not seeing anyone typing any questions at the moment, so I'll let you know again that this presentation is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in the next few days. All of our registrants will receive an email when that is available. And again, please feel free to share with anyone you think might be interested in the content or might benefit from the content, or even if you just want to watch again to get some further information. This is a monthly webinar series for us. So please check with us on social media, particularly LinkedIn, ELOS Environmental, and you can stay updated on what our next topic will be, and also future replays of webinars. Also, if you have an idea or something you would like to see discussed in a webinar, please feel free to either enter it into the chat box right now or message us at our LinkedIn page, because we're always looking to figure out how we can provide the best information for people and things they might encounter in projects, and how they may overcome challenges and things they need to be aware of. So please feel free, if there's a topic you'd like to see us cover, drop us a message. We'd really appreciate it. And again, we do this on a monthly basis, so check in with us on LinkedIn, follow our page, and you'll be fully up to date on all of the webinars. I don't see any questions. So with that, I will wish you a good rest of your day. Also, an early, happy, and safe holiday weekend to you and your families and friends. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.